Hi, welcome to my talk on finding our way. To begin, I believe that all science is a function of who we are as a person. So I wanted to start on a story about me. I was raised on blueberries and backyard cricket. My mother's maiden name translates from urso to bear in English, which may be why I'm fiercely protective of young people in sport. I've been coaching for 12 years, since I was 15, and I did a PhD by accident after applying to a Facebook ad with only 24 hours to write a proposal. Children ask about 40,000 questions between the ages of 2 and 5. And I probably asked my lecturers that many questions between 2014 and 2017. So now I will talk you through some of those questions. Why don't we throw a mug across a room? This is the moment I realized that the way we explain the world can be different depending on our science. Skill acquisition suggests that we don't need to use every muscle in our arm to pick up something we've never seen before. So how can we move in the world with only the idea of moving when we have to move to learn? Why do we accept that talent needs trauma and survival? This is the question that made me think about talent development differently. Do we need to suffer to get better at what we do? I never believed that, and all of my research has now been in pursuit of that particular question. Why do we train girls differently to boys? As a cricket coach, I heard a parent yell at a young girl to take it easy because she was doing too well. But nobody ever told my brother that. So why do we treat girls differently to boys ended up being the question that started my PhD. And after that, why do we train in stale environments and expect people to perform in rich, complex ones? If I am bored at training when I try to learn to get better, how would I ever get better at playing this very complex game? And that ended up being some of my favorite papers from my PhD. So this story is about the threads of research. And I've put it like this because I think research is searching again. So all the stories that come now are from my search for answers and realizing that we don't really have any. As the first PhD in women's cricket, we didn't know anything about this area of sport. So we asked them. The female talent pathway looks like this. They have positive learning experiences when they are young. It is harder to leave the pathway than it is to actually get in. Playing men's cricket was great for their skill development, but they had so many negative experiences in trying to get better. And you needed to enter the pathway before 15 years old. Most of them actually got in before they were 12 years old. When we asked coaches and people who run the teams, they said there was no aim for the talent pathway. They could either tell me detailed programs or nothing. And when we asked what performance looks like, they loved that it was adaptability and decision-making. But none of their training was designed to develop adaptability or decision-making. So I wanted to take this information from the people who it mattered most to and bring it back to my roots. I designed a training tool to help coaches measure what needs to be real. The goal was to measure training design across 2 seasons, one as a baseline and then an intervention to make it better. After 21 weeks of training, there was no change in training design. It was at this point we started to wonder if my PhD was worth it. Because if anyone does any research, our analysis for statistics is looking for variance, and there was none. Lucky for me, we decided that that was important, and we were able to publish that even though it was technically no result. So what do we do better? What does our new forest floor look like? Well, we had to ask if more realistic training actually equals better skills. The task design tool was used to co-design training with the players. We asked them what they wanted to be able to do to measure their skill development with no additional support, feedback, or coaching. The hard part was we did want some coaching, but in women's cricket, often coaching is not paid. So the coach didn't attend enough training sessions to count as a participant. So while it would be nice to say this intervention was well loved and people enjoyed it, we didn't have a coach. So in future, we would hope to have one. So what needs to be real? The way that we receive the ball needs to be somewhat similar to what we do during the game. Now, this links back to Gabrielle's perception-action coupling. If we want to act in realistic ways, we need to perceive the information that would help us act. When we make decisions in the game, they need to be realistic too, to act like we would based on the game context. Now, I've used information a few times now, so both feed and decision-making need real information to help make good decisions, but also know when to make them and based on what. And finally, we have variability. This refers to how similar or different our tasks and movements are. A lot of variability is seen on game day, but little is seen at training. This can be within different tasks, the same task by adding a challenge, but hopefully we see it in both. So our results from this intervention can be boiled down to 2 main takeaways. More training in realistic environments does not equal better skill development. If anything, it was too overwhelming because it was too different from what they would normally do to train. So while it would be nice to say that more realistic training is better, it's actually about finding the right level of realistic training to help people get better. So for us, that was 75% of what a real training environment would look like. And that's based on the 4 factors we mentioned before. So quality training design is less about being perfect and more about being better than before. So the 2 things that I learned through this study was the most advanced yet acceptable. It is more important to maximize what you can do and then race towards what 100% looks like. So our goal for every training session is what can we make 1% better? And that is already better than before. And the second is that training how you play does not look like the game. It is about taking moments from that game and reliving them so that you can explore them even more at training. Now, this led me to a fork in the road. I had my questions about talent development and about coach education. So the next section is going to go through talent development first and then coach education. And the one sentence that I was left with after the PhD is that talent development and human development is non-linear and not predictable. But how do we help people believe that? We wrote a paper about it. That seems like a really logical way to do it. But also, I've been trying to get better at finding catchy ways to share that information. So a statistic that I have memorized is that you have a better chance of being struck by lightning than you are of playing in the NBA. And if that doesn't make you wonder why we care so much about talent, you're probably more likely to get hit by lightning. Development is nonlinear, and we can look at this in 3 ways. Development is a process. It carries on. It's dialogical, so it's not in isolation, and it's open-ended with no fixed destination. Now, the hardest part is convincing you that time is nonlinear, and the best way to do that is to give you some examples. So we split this into 2 different sides: to have talent and to be talent. Now, to have talent is a property, an inequality, or an ability for a particular performance, which often looks like performing better than your peers. The past and the present are considered, but there is no future. So we look at training hours or current performance, but we can't really measure what someone is going to do in the future, even though that's what we are trying to predict. In testing procedures, we evaluate that which exists in actuality, not in possibility. On the other hand, we have to be talent, a relationship between the present and the future. Are not reached potential, they are still in becoming. So to be talent is about developing to become who you can be and who you are not yet, which could be an elite athlete. Current performance values need to be considered only as tendencies, which describe a condition of having talent, and that may or may not eventually correlate with future performance. Whenever someone asks me what the biggest takeaway from our paper is, I give them this quote: "What we see now is a tendency, but it is not a prediction." Development is non-linear. So our current performance plus our hours of practice does not equal development. It doesn't actually matter how many hours you spend training if those hours are spent poorly. Likewise, you can perform really well with absolutely no training at all, or with a lot of hours spent training. But there is no direct relationship between those 2 things and our development. So making people go to training so they spend more hours of practice is no guarantee that it will develop their skills. If you thought time is nonlinear is hard, development is dialogical is even harder. So dialogical means relating to dialogue, which in this context reminds us that everything we do is interacting with something or someone else. A conversation, a dialogue. Past, context, anticipated future, and history all contribute to the emergence of every act and moment. We might like to think that the past is behind us, but it shapes our actions today and even tomorrow, maybe without us knowing it. A great example of this I found in a TV show called For All Mankind. It was about an astronaut trying to land on Mars. They wanted to be first, and they took so many risks to get there. But as they were showing us his descent down onto this dusty red planet, they kept showing us the last time he was in this moment, trying to be the first person on the moon. At that time, they didn't take the risk. They played it safe and kept everybody alive and returned home safely. But they didn't end up being the first on the moon. The way that they filmed it is they actually kept swapping between which version we were looking at. So it was really hard to tell if he was about to land on the moon or land on Mars. A perfect example of what it feels like to do something right now, but feel like the past is there with you. Sometimes it can be really hard to tell, and you may not notice, but your past and your future are always there with you. They are always having a conversation. So Mark O'Sullivan and colleagues recently designed a nice figure to show how our interactions with different systems can shape our behaviours in the context of ice hockey. They highlighted that current performance and development are dependent on and resultant of an entangled relationship between the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem. So very quickly, on the smallest scale, we have our microsystem. This is the training that we do every day and the kind of practice that we do. If we zoom out a little further, we have our mesosystem, which is our influences, our parents, our peers, and the way that we play with those people. If we zoom out a little further, we have our neighborhood community, the teams that we play in, and the legacies of those coaches that came before the coaches that we meet today. And then we have our macro system, which a great example is that houses in Australia don't have backyards anymore. So how can we get people to play on the street and make friends with their neighbours if people don't play in the way that our suburbs are designed? So there are so many things happening at once, helping us or hindering us from developing our skills. And none of these are more important than the other. They all happen at the same time. Development is open-ended, so there is no fixed destination to our development, which means that we cannot capture someone's growth in a snapshot. It is not as easy as taking a Polaroid of someone as a teenager at training and saying, this person will be an elite athlete. But when we measure their talent, that's exactly what we try to do. Development is governed by interdeterminacy, which means that everything can act at the same time and are determined by one another. So if we change one thing, it's very difficult to know what else could change as a result of that. So we need to try and keep those pictures as open and moving as possible. So the only developable certainty is actually uncertainty. And we need to get more comfortable with not knowing. A perfect way to describe this is, of course, by Tim Ingold. The world creeps up on us, behind our back, and then freezes the instant we turn around to look. So every time we look at an athlete or a person and think we know what they can do, really, that's just one frozen moment in time, one instant. And when we turn around, they might do something that we could have never predicted. So what should you do with this kind of information? We want to discourage early identification and specialization policies that cause athletes to prematurely stop their process of becoming. Instead, we want to move towards observation and active participation, which requires time with the athletes to grow knowledge of their becoming. We want to see what they can do over time rather than judge them on a snapshot that we took once. Now, these threads might not seem connected, but ultimately how we train and the people who do have their skills developed are determined by the coaches that they interact with. Now, I said none of those pieces are more important than the other, but they are more sentimental to me more than anything else. So I realized that coaches need to design better learning environments. So how do we educate our coaches? Well, we can write papers about it, but we can also keep asking as many questions as possible in different contexts. So for now, we've been looking at a variety of coaches in different sports to see if their stories are very different. But first, we have to determine what we mean by education. So Kraft in 1984 stated that there is actually two different meanings for the word education as we say it in English. The Latin roots are educare, which implies to train or to mold, and educere, which means to lead out. So educare is what we are most familiar with. This is what coach education mostly looks like. We mold a coach to pass an assessment and transfer knowledge to those who are compliant, willing to listen. But in doing so, we may not be helping them to cope with their complex, intricate relationships and decision-making in dynamic coaching environments. We're taking their learning away from them. On the other hand, educere is slightly different. The goal is to lead out rather than to fill people up with knowledge. Experts may know a lot, but they do not know your coaching environment, your players, your context. Coach education should help you know those better rather than just knowing more. We can encourage critical thinking and adaptability through inskillment, which is a process of growing knowledge and skills through direct guided experience of a live coaching moment. This is almost the opposite of what we see in coach education for now. Of course, we also have to define what knowledge is, because this will dictate how we guide. What do we mean by knowledge is something that we had to address in depth in the paper, but this is a very brief version. We have two types of knowledge. Knowledge about is where a coach is reliant on using verbal instructions, graphics, pictures and images, which are indirectly perceived to access facts about an environment. We can see a gameplay on a whiteboard, and that tells us how the players should move. That is a perfect example of knowledge about. We also have knowledge of an environment, this direct perception of surrounding information. So using our senses to actually feel what is happening. And this directly regulates how coaches interact with others, developed through experiential learning under interacting constraints. We are feeling it for ourselves, experiencing it for ourselves, and seeing how everything interacts together. Now, not one source of information or knowledge is better than the other, but we do put far more emphasis on knowledge about, and we're not very good at helping people find their knowledge of. This emergent process actually allows coaches to transition to a new state of knowing how to coach better, represented by an enhanced knowledge of the environment. When we grow our knowledge, we are giving you the chance to actually feel it for yourself. So both forms of knowledge can be leveraged in coach development to connect the coaching practices with relevant theoretical frameworks, and that supports your exploration. And that is the most important part. This gives you the power to keep exploring, not to keep coaching the same way. And if that's what you want to do, that is perfectly fine, but we would love to see you explore a little further. I promise you don't have to do this alone. So this sounds like a lot to navigate by yourself, but thankfully that's not the case. We can use an experienced other to help us guide us on our path. My path through research has been guided by some amazing people like Keith Davids and Carl Woods, but they might be further along the path. An experienced other doesn't have to be. It can also be the people who are sitting next to you, who are maybe just starting their own path, or the people that you interact with every day, your friends, your family, other coaches. When looking for an experienced other, we need to consider what they know and what they do. So we want an experienced other who has knowledge about the environment, but can use it to help you find your knowledge of the environment by creating experiences for you to explore yourself. And that means leading you out into your own environment. So an experienced other has interactions that are not just about abstract and social things, but are actually embedded within the environment. An active relational interaction between an experienced other and a coach that is ongoing in the moment. So mentoring becomes educere when we have 4 different concepts. We start with correspondence, which is participating with the world. The interaction between a coach, an experienced other, and the coaching environment is happening all of the time. And this creates a sharedness, something that you all share together. You share your learning, your understanding of the world, and the way that you can respond to problems as they happen. Coach education then can't be pre-planned because a formal curriculum assumes that we know what is going to happen in a live environment, and we don't. So we need to actually grow what effective coaching looks like live in the moment together. That also means we have to realize that we don't know everything, and actually we only know as we go. So this is about accepting unpredictability and uncertainty, striving to know how to coach better by actually coaching. A coach is led out into their own world rather than drawn into the mentor's world, which is away from their everyday context. This may open up to barriers and resistance if coaching differently is not welcomed, but hopefully our experienced other can help you weather that storm too. Next, we have guidance without specification, guiding others towards the discovery of things for themselves, rather than setting rules to tell you what you can do and how you can do it. Our experienced other would invite you to interact with your environment and be right there to talk you through what is happening. They can also amplify or dampen invitations in your coaching to help support your exploration, maybe without you even noticing it. And the best way to do that is without specifying what and how to do. Now, all of this is predicated on paying attention. So paying attention is foundation to many of these concepts, where we find or place the invitations for the coaches to explore. This highlights the importance of a coach developer, of a mentor, actually dwelling with the coach. You have to be there together to know the environment well. Our paying attention can look like gentle nudges towards information that we maybe didn't notice, or can be through asking questions, either to find out why we do things or to explore a space we haven't considered yet, to open up to possibilities. The balance for an experienced other is between paying attention to the coaching environment and the coach at the same time, so they can respond together. So I would be a hypocrite if I didn't actually explore further myself. So the last few slides are about my job in cricket. I am the learning and capability specialist at one of the big sporting organisations in Australia for one of our favourite sports in the country. Like many sports, we hold coaching courses at different levels. One event to come and learn, and then return to your own environment. But the coaches told us that they don't change their behavior after doing a course. And why would they? We've taken them away from the days that they coach, from the people that we coach, and assumed that we know what that looks like, giving them a bag of goodies, some transfer of knowledge so they can take it back to their home, but it doesn't fit. So what if we actually looked at coach education courses differently? What if we took training to the people? What if a conversation, a question, an uncertain answer, and more questions actually led to your coaching accreditation? I like to think of this as a curious orbit. When I don't know something, I will kind of sit in my space And then as I get closer to an answer, I might orbit around different people. And as I do, I get more momentum and I keep getting faster and faster or further and further so that the answers that I find, I couldn't have found alone. What if the content we delivered in coaching courses was prepared but not planned in that way? So we set every coach on their own orbit, maybe finding the same information, maybe at different times, but only when they need it most to be a better coach, or at least find their own way. And on that note, that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.